Hey everyone, and welcome back. You know how much we love a good historical mystery, and this one, well, this one's got it all. We're diving into the Dancing Plague.
Yeah, the dancing plague. It's exactly what it sounds like. People dancing for days, sometimes weeks on end.
And it's not just some weird party that got out of hand. These outbreaks were actually a recurring thing in Europe for centuries.
Yeah, for centuries, which is the really creepy part. I mean, we're
Right.
talking hundreds of people just dancing until they collapsed from exhaustion. Some even died.
It sounds almost too strange to be true, right? Like, what could possibly make people dance themselves to death?
It's a question that has puzzled, well, everyone really, for centuries. But one of the most famous outbreaks was back in 1518 in Strasbourg. It all started with this woman, Frau Treffet.
And she just started dancing in the street? What, like out of nowhere?
Pretty much. And she just didn't stop. Days turned into weeks, and soon she was joined by dozens and then hundreds of other people, all caught in the same uncontrollable frenzy.
Okay, so we've got mass dancing in the streets. What are the theories? What could possibly explain this? Was it something they ate? Some kind of weird mass hysteria?
Well, one theory is that it was a curse, like a real-life curse from Saint Vitus. He was this Catholic saint, and people believed he had the power to inflict a dancing mania on anyone who crossed him.
A dancing curse? I mean, hey, if you're going to be cursed, might as well get down with your bad self.
Right. But seriously, you have to think about the context here. This is 16th century Europe. Life was pretty rough back then. Plagues, famine, religious persecution, you name it, people were stressed. So it's not that far-fetched to think that some of that anxiety and fear might have manifested in these really physical ways.
Okay, that makes sense. But a curse? I don't know. It seems a little convenient. What about something a little more, shall we say, scientific?
Right. Well, there's another theory that points to a fungus called ergot. It grows on rye, which was a staple food back then, and it can cause all sorts of nasty symptoms, including hallucinations and spasms.
Ergot. Isn't that the stuff they make LSD from?
Well, sort of. LSD is actually derived from ergot. But yeah, ergot poisoning could definitely explain some of the bizarre behavior.
Okay, so we've got a dancing curse and a psychedelic fungus. What else? What other clues are we working with here? So it's like trying to solve a murder mystery, but instead of a body, we've got hundreds of people dancing themselves to death. And the murder weapon could be a curse, a fungus, or maybe even something weirder.
Or maybe a combination of things. We have to remember the people dancing weren't faking it. They were experiencing something very real and very intense.
Right, we don't want to downplay the very real suffering that was going on.
Exactly. So while ergot poisoning might explain some of the physical symptoms, there might be more to it than just that, especially when you consider the sheer scale of these outbreaks. Hundreds of people all dancing in unison. That's going to make you wonder if there's a psychological component at play as well.
Right, like some kind of mass hysteria. But if that's the case, how do we explain the physical toll? We're not just talking about a few tired feet here. People were dancing themselves to exhaustion, becoming severely dehydrated, and tragically, some even died.
You've hit on a crucial point. The historical records paint a very vivid picture of the physical toll this dancing mania took on people. It wasn't a case of simply feeling lightheaded or a bit tired. The level of physical exertion described is pretty hard to fathom, and it's this intersection of the physical and the psychological that makes the dancing plague so incredibly perplexing.
See, this is what I love about this stuff.
Hmm.
It's like trying to untangle two mysteries at once. On the one hand, you have these very real, very serious physical symptoms. And on the other, you have this potential psychological trigger, this mass hysteria that seems to have gripped entire communities.
Exactly. And this is where looking at other more recent examples of mass psychogenic illness might give us some clues. Take, for example, the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962. Now, obviously, we're not talking about dancing here, but the idea of uncontrollable laughter spreading through a community has some interesting parallels to the dancing plague.
You're right. I remember reading about that. It was a bunch of schoolgirls who just started laughing uncontrollably, and then it just spread like wildfire.
Right. That's the one. The laughter, sometimes lasting for days, spread through schools and villages in Tanganyika, which is modern-day Tanzania. It's often cited as a classic example of mass psychogenic illness. And like you said, there are some really intriguing parallels to the dancing plague.
So we're talking about these weird outbreaks of involuntary movement, uncontrollable dancing, uncontrollable laughter, both totally disruptive, both super weird, and both with real-world consequences. Makes you wonder if there isn't something deeper going on. Like maybe it's not just about the dancing or the laughing, but about how our minds and bodies react when things get really, really stressful.
Exactly, and don't forget the historical context here. Life in 16th century Europe wasn't exactly a picnic. People were dealing with plague outbreaks, religious persecution, constant warfare. It was like living in a pressure cooker.
Yeah, I mean, we might complain about our jobs and our commutes, but at
Yes.
least we're not worried about the Black Death, right?
Right. But that's what makes these historical mysteries so fascinating. They offer a glimpse into how our ancestors coped with unimaginable stress and how those experiences sometimes manifested in these really strange and powerful ways.
So where does that leave us? We've got some pretty compelling theories about the dancing plague. We've got the St. Vitus curse, ergot poisoning, mass psychogenic illness, but none of them seem to fully explain everything.
That's the thing about history, isn't it? It's full of these unanswered questions, these mysteries that we may never fully solve. But that doesn't mean we should stop searching for answers.
Exactly. It's the mystery that keeps us coming back for more. And who knows, maybe someday we will uncover that one piece of evidence that finally cracks the case. But until then, well, that's the fun of it all, isn't it? Getting to explore these weird and wonderful corners of history. Thanks for coming along with us on this deep dive into the Dancing Plague. It's a tale of mystery, intrigue, and maybe just a little bit of fungus. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into history's most fascinating mysteries.